very much, Mr. President. To you and to your colleagues and to the trustees and the faculty and fellow honorees, I really appreciate the chance to be here, but before I begin my remarks, I want to give the graduates a chance to stand and turn and say thank you to your family members who are here today. So please, take advantage. That'll probably be a little more robust later. I've been to 3 graduations of my own, my high school graduation, my college graduation, and my business school graduation. I don't know who spoke at my high school graduation. The German chancellor spoke at my college graduation. I don't remember a single thing he said. And the then president of General Motors spoke at my business school graduation. I don't remember anything he said either. So I'm assuming that I have a very tall order here to say anything that you might actually take away with you today. So I'm gonna stick to some very tried and true sayings and cliches, so that maybe someday when you use them, you might think of me. My first one is pretty simple, which is that sometimes things happen for a reason. Now, my family is very familiar with Colby. We have lots of friends, and our friends have lots of children who went here and loved it. In fact, I almost went to Colby. I was recruited by then basketball coach Dick Whitmore. I visited the school several times and loved it. And for one reason or another, it didn't happen. Instead, I went to Harvard, and you landed this guy that I played against in high school and in many summer leagues for years after, by the name of Jim Crook. He was a darn good basketball player and an even better guy, and honestly, I kind of think you got the better part of that deal. And I would have loved to have played with him in college, and I know how much he loves Colby. Your basketball arena is named after his mother. Now, many years later, one of my boys, who was also a terrific high school football player, was also recruited by Colby. He visited the campus, and he loved it too. For one reason or another, it didn't work out for him. He ended up at Union College in upstate New York, co-captained the football team, and loved just about everything about that place. Interestingly enough, outside of the basketball program at Harvard, I really never felt like I fit there. I wondered about that the whole time I was there, presuming that it was my fault because what the heck, Harvard? And afterwards, I finally figured it out. It was too big for me. I should have gone with what I would describe as the best fit. I still managed to graduate on time in the spring of 1997, right into one of the worst job markets ever. The unemployment rate was 6% and rising, and it peaked at 11% in 1982. Inflation was 13%, the highest number in U.S. post-World War II history. And in the fall of 1979, the Iranian government stormed our embassy and held more than 50 Americans hostage for over a year. Simply put, it was not a great time to be looking for a job. And at that time, my goal, my life dream, was to be a sports writer. I'd written hundreds of sports stories and some occasional columns under my own name for numerous newspapers. You all know what newspapers are. Just checking. Throughout the course of my college career, and I continued to do so after I graduated. To pay the bills, I continued to work on a loading dock at a welding supply and bottle gas company that I worked at during the previous 5 summers, a job which I absolutely loved, and I tended bar at a nightclub that I'd worked at on weekends during college. After about 6-9 months of this, I began to realize that that full-time job wasn't going to happen. The unemployment and inflation issues were the big issues of the day. And in the post-Watergate era, I was competing with a ton of other young people who wanted to get into journalism. One day, a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to work on John Connolly's presidential campaign. Now, Connolly was a former Democratic governor of Texas. In fact, he was shot and almost killed in the same car that killed John F. Kennedy. Some years later, he had a falling out with the Democrats over some of their foreign policy positions, and he became a Republican. I knew about him, I liked him, and I thought, why not? Heck, he might win. Now, working on a presidential campaign, even a bad one, was a lot of fun. John Connally did not win. In fact, he set the world record for the most money spent on a presidential election to earn one delegate. But I met a guy when I was working on the campaign who was from the New England Council. They were looking for a communications person, and I interviewed for and got that job. 2 years later, I interviewed for a communications job at the Mass High Technology Council, and I got that one too. And that was when I fell in love with state government. It was big enough to make a difference, but small enough to actually see it happen. It was 1982. I was 27 years old. I was making $27,000 a year. And this is true. I remember thinking at that time that if I just earned my age as my salary for the rest of my life, I was going to be fine. Now, over the next 40 years, I had a bunch of great jobs, but they all circled close to that flame about state government. I was a cabinet secretary, thank you for reminding me, of 2 governors in the 1990s. I left state government in 1999 to run a large nonprofit, multi-specialty medical group that was affiliated with the nonprofit health plan Harvard Pilgrim. I then got asked by the medical group and the health plan to become the CEO of Harvard Pilgrim when the plan got into trouble in the fall of 2000. Now, we built an amazing team. We brought them back from bankruptcy, and they became the highest ranked health plan in the country for clinical effectiveness and member satisfaction for 6 years in a row. After that, I decided my next act would be to run for governor, where I got smoked in 2010. I ran again in 2014 and won by the smallest margin in state election history. And then we won again in a blowout in 2018. I don't know why, but somehow that qualified me to interview for the job as president of the NCAA in late 22, and they hired me. What's my point? 43 years after I failed to get that job in sports that I so desperately wanted when I was coming out of college, I finally got one at the age of 66, working for the NCAA. Yeah, it was a long ride. Point is, sometimes things happen for a reason. If I'd succeeded in my earlier career choices, it's quite likely I never would have found my love for state government or run for or been elected governor. And that brings me to point number 2. You will be the company you keep. Honestly, if you take nothing else away from my comments today, take that. My life and the life of most people I know, for better or for worse, has been made by the people that they've been lucky enough or unlucky enough to surround themselves with. My wife, Lauren's the brightest light in my life. Her presence, our children, the friends and neighbors and coworkers we've been blessed to know, their company, more than any other, has made the dark days lighter and the greater days unforgettable. But it almost didn't happen. She and I both almost married other people. Now, the woman I almost married went on to marry somebody else, and everyone agrees he was a much better guy for her than I would have been. Why did she and I split up, which at the time was awful for both of us? Why did I go to Harvard when I probably should have gone to school, like Colby or Union, or the president's former address at Hamilton College? Why was it so friggin' hard for me to get a job in sports journalism when I got out of college? That is because sometimes things happen for a reason. But it's the company you keep who help you get through that. Which brings me to point number 3. Adversity doesn't build character, it reveals it. No one tells anyone this when they're young, but you're old enough to know it now. Everyone gets scarred in life. It's impossible to avoid it. Humans are imperfect, and our lives are also imperfect. I have cuts, bruises, and scars from all kinds of moments, circumstances, and incidents that went sideways. Some of those wounds were self-inflicted, lessons I needed to learn, but most of them were just car crashes that can only be described as random and maybe even unfair. They just are, and they will be, and they will happen to you. And that's why the company you keep will be so important. When life punched me in the gut, it was the company I kept that helped me get through it. And the same will be true for you. The friends, family, coworkers, and neighbors that you have will stand by you, support you, give you the sounding board, the love, and the honesty, which sometimes will be hard to hear, and the hugs that you'll need to find the best in you when the chips are down. But they can't do it all by themselves. You'll need to show up, listen, learn, be humble in the moment, accept responsibility, and make adjustments. After I ran for governor in 2010 and lost, I did something most previously running for office non-elected officials don't do. I went and met with all the reporters who covered the race, the talking heads, the so-called experts, and I took a lot of incoming voluntarily from my friends about what a terrible job I'd done running for office. The whole thing was a pretty humiliating experience. I had friends who'd known me throughout the course of my life who said, geez, I would have loved to have voted for you, but God, you were such a bad candidate. And my parents, my mom, the Democrat, my dad, the Republican, who never voted for the same person in any election. I remember the day after that election saying to my parents, well, at least you guys voted for the same person for the first time, at which point my mother looked at me and said, you know, son, it's a secret ballot. Can't get your mother's vote. I mean, but I learned a lot about why I lost that race and why most people thought I should have done better. And one line in particular stuck with me. A friend of mine who was a salesman said, you spent way too much time with your customers and not enough time with your prospects. Of course, he was right. I campaigned in places and spaces where I was most comfortable, and I stayed away from the places that would have been more challenging. When I ran again in 2014, I campaigned in every community and every neighborhood, including a lot of time in the ones I lost big in 2010. And it was great. I learned a ton I didn't know about other people's life experiences, their impressions of me when I ran the first time, and what they cared about. I asked a lot of questions, and their responses made me a much better candidate, a much better governor when we won, and honestly, a much better person. That's not easy to say, but it's true. If I'd won in 2010 as an incomplete person and an underdeveloped candidate, I would have underperformed as governor. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Losing in 2010 made the chance for growth and reflection prior to 14 possible, and it made me a better person, and I know it made me a better governor. And that brings me to point number 4. People define themselves. No one else can do it for you. What do you want the people you know to say about you? That you're a great friend, someone they can count on, a great neighbor, a great colleague, a great teammate. Is that what they'd say, or would they say something else? And be honest. It's important to understand that you'll define what others say and think about you. You define who you are by yourself, to yourself, and to others. You own it. It's all yours. My dad always used to say that people get fired by their peers and their subordinates long before they get fired by their bosses. That was his way of telling me that managing up is for losers. No offense meant, Mr. President. What really matters is your relationship with the people that you work with every day, that you depend on, your teammates, the ones that you rely on and that rely on you. They will determine your fate. If you're an ass, they'll act accordingly, and you'll be out on yours in no time. If you treat people the way you would like to be treated, if you listen and learn, if you prove to be a reliable, dependable, steady force for good, trust me, the rest of it will take care of itself. One final point, and then you'll be done with me. Point number 5, life is a journey, not a destination. My dad's parents were happily married for 49 years. They met at a field hospital near Verdun, France, during World War I. He was a soldier from New York City, and she was a Red Cross nurse from Newburyport, Massachusetts. They fell in love, and after they got back to the States, they wrote a lot of letters to each other, like practically every week for over 2 years. No long-distance phone calls, no iPhones. This was 1919, 1920, and 1921. No visits on the weekends because neither one of them had the money that would have been required to make the trip. So they wrote back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That's how people communicated back then. Now, after about 2 years of that, my grandfather asked my grandmother in a letter to marry him. She wrote back and said no. She said they were too old to get married. She was 37, he was 33. She'd gone to Smith College. He never went to college. She had a good job and a ton of family in Newburyport, and he didn't appear to have much of either in New York City. She said in the end it just wouldn't work. Now, years later, my dad confessed to his children that he always believed that letter was written by his mother's father, not by his mom. And if you think about it, my dad would say, girl with a good family from Newburyport goes off to Europe during the war to tend wounded soldiers, falls in love with an injured soldier they know nothing about other than he's from New York City and he worked at some clothing store. Not good enough for my daughter, said my dad, quoting his grandfather. Well, my grandfather was heartbroken when he got that letter, and he assumed that was the end of it. Then about a month later, my grandmother wrote him another letter. Is the offer still open, she asked. He wrote back immediately, of course. She followed her heart, defied her father, something at that point in time young women just didn't do, married my grandfather in 1922, and moved to New York City. They raised 3 amazing children, including my dad, all 3 of whom went to college. And my grandfather worked various jobs at that same men's clothing store until he retired in around 1955. Sadly, he got very sick in his mid-60s. He had crippling physical ailments and he lost his sight. So they moved back home to her hometown, Newburyport, where my grandmother's extended family could help out. This was good news for me because I got to spend a lot of time with my grandfather. And a lot of that was long days sitting with him on the porch of their house in Newburyport, listening to the Boston Red Sox on his transistor radio. Now, it's hard for me to explain to all of you what watching a baseball game on the radio with a blind person is like. But boy, did he teach me how to focus. And he had an answer for every question I ever asked him. He was a joy. He died in 1971. I happened to take the call from my grandmother when she called to tell me the news. And I had to man up and tell my mom and tell my brothers when they came home that Grandpa had passed away. My grandmother died 12 years later at 96, still sharp as a tack, hilariously funny, and one of the truly great ladies I've ever known. I love them both very much. Now, my dad used to say that they were a really odd couple in almost every way, except one. They were crazy about each other, and they both thought that they won the lottery when they found each other on that field in Verdun, France. Their journey was nothing like anything either of them could have ever imagined, and they played the good days and the bad ones with equal amounts of humor and grace. And because it was the journey they never could have anticipated, it turned out to be everything they ever could have hoped or dreamed for. Now, if you've gotten the point here, they found each other because sometimes things happen for a reason. Their life was magnificent in all sorts of ways they never could have expected because they were the company they kept. Despite all the challenges that they faced Throughout the course of their long life together, they found a path forward, built a beautiful life, a wonderful family, and dealt with all of his problems and ailments right up until the time he died, because adversity doesn't build character, it reveals it. And people define themselves in ways no one can do it for you, because they, more than anything else, wanted to be that great neighbor, that good friend, and that kind and willing collaborator that they expected others to be to them. And boy, in the end, that life was not a destination, it was a journey. And I really hope for all of you, as you begin yours, that your lives are as rich and as full of surprises, love, challenges, disappointments, and happiness as theirs. God bless you all, and good luck.